Is TCU an option if the Big Ten expands again? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever it is you get your podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also subscribe wherever it is you listen to podcasts in its audio form. I'm Steven Simcox, your host. You can hit me up in the YouTube comments or tweet at me at SimcoxSteven. There was a report yesterday on X, formerly known as Twitter, that TCU could be a target for the Big Ten if and when the conference decides to expand again. And this has kind of been kicked around in the shadows for a couple of years. I've heard rumors of it. I haven't really heard anything substantial. It's been kicked around on message boards. This report from James Yoder of Chat Sports is the most mainstream discussion I've seen about it. But TCU has been very proactive in realignment. I think Jeremiah Donati and Chancellor Bushini and the university have done a great job of at least trying to find a home. Now, this goes both ways. There has to be mutual interest, right? You can't just throw yourself out there. I mean, I guess SMU found a way to just kind of buy their way into a major conference. It felt like that moment in Arrested Development where Job is there with that group of magicians, and they're like, we demand to be taken seriously. That's SMU and the ACC. They're just paying their way into a conference. But to their credit, they rallied and they did it, and they found a way to get back into major college football if the ACC comes together. But even when the Big 12 looked like it was going to dismantle a few years back, when Texas and Oklahoma left and everybody was freaking out, and it was like, okay, this is the end. Bob Bowlesby was still in charge. He was never known as being a really proactive guy. He was constantly on the defensive. It felt like he didn't have the respect of his peers and other conference commissioners. TCU was talking to the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 ultimately decided not to expand. And because of their arrogance and because of the bad deals that Larry Scott made, and then George Kliakoff not being forward-thinking at all, they ended up getting poached and they disbanded. But there was a short time there, Matt Kingle reported this, when the Pac-12 was having all its issues and Arizona and Colorado and other schools were coming over to the Big 12. There was a short window where it looked like TCU might be in the mix for Pac-12 membership. And that was going to be the life raft to get out of the Big 12 and move on. I really like where the Big 12 is currently. And I think it's going to be a competitive conference. I think it's going to be a good conference. I feel like there's good regional rivalries within it. I feel like there will still be a chance to compete on a national level. But the major thing that everyone's concerned about outside of the SEC and the Big Ten is the SEC and the Big Ten hold the most power here. They are currently throwing their weight around with college football expansion talk. They're pitching ideas like, hey, we should have 4 automatic qualifiers. The SEC should have 4 automatic qualifiers. The Big Ten should have 4 automatic qualifiers. And then we'll graciously give the rest to you. And because they have more resources and I guess more money, and they're kind of calling the shots here with TV executives, other conferences don't have a big recourse. Now, Brett Yormark, I think, is working really hard. He's trying to close the gap financially. He's looking at maybe coming up with an individual deal for Big 12 basketball. They're going to play games internationally. They're trying to find ways to close the gap, and I think he's doing a good job of that. A major concern, though, moving forward is, could potentially the Big Ten and the SEC break off from the NCAA and leave everybody else in the dust and create essentially their own kind of super league that has its own national champion, and they play basically each other. Maybe they dip down and play schools in other conferences once or twice a year, but for the most part, they just play each other, and that's the end of it. Or do we stay in this current system where the Big 12 still has access to the playoff, the expanded playoff, but even TCU, if they have a really good team at the top of the development cycle that has a chance to compete at the highest level, will they still get disrespected by the committee because they're in the Big 12 and then have to go on the road in a round 1 matchup and win 3 or 4 games to make the national title game? TCU's issue competitive. They haven't been consistent. Excuse me, as I just played my intro again there. There's been high highs and then there's been some low lows. But by and large, over the past 2 decades, TCU has been one of the most successful programs in college football. They won the playoff game against Michigan, made the national championship a few years back, went undefeated and won a Rose Bowl, won a Peach Bowl against Ole Miss, played in the Fiesta Bowl. I mean, they've been at the highest level of college football for a long time. So it's totally understandable to me why the powers that be at TCU and us as fans would say, hey, we want in on this. We want to be playing at the highest level, whatever that looks like in the next few years, whether that's us having equal access to the playoff the Big Ten and the SEC have, or joining whatever Super League forms in the next few years. The issue with that is you're currently in the Big 12, and there is a gap between the Big 12, even though I like it, and I think it's going to be a fun conference, and those 2 leagues as it stands right now. Jeremiah Donati actually spoke with some local media yesterday, and Chris Vanini from The Athletic had this quote. I should have pulled this up before I got going, but I'm going to find it here. He said, TCU AD Jeremiah Donati spoke with some local media today on a few topics. On further CFP expansion and changes, I'm not involved in negotiations of CFP extension, but it feels as though there are 2 conferences trying to stack the deck versus everyone else. That's potentially going to create competitive inequity that I don't think is good for college football. I don't think fans want that. That's really disheartening. Hopefully it doesn't work out that way, but it seems like that's the direction we're going in. And he's right. I mean, the playoff in theory was supposed to create a more equal playing field for everybody. And it feels like it's just made the gap wider. Not everybody has equal access to it. And now you have 2 conferences that are trying to call the shots. So what does it mean for TCU as we kind of jump into the next phase of college football? An interesting report came out yesterday from James T. Yoder of Chat Sports. This is his tweet. A well-placed source. Big Ten will expand again before the 2026 season, adding at least 2, but possibly as many as 6 more teams. In an effort to fill their national footprint, schools in Florida, Texas, the Southwest, and Mid-Atlantic regions are a priority. Which schools? Well, outside of Notre Dame being the obvious top target, the short list of schools being considered are, in order, Florida State, TCU, Arizona, Arizona State, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Miami, and Kansas. So, Big Ten, according to this report, is apparently still interested in expanding by 2026, adding more teams. And the SEC and the Big Ten have kind of gone about this in different ways. The SEC has been very selective about who they've taken. And for the most part, they have stayed regional. I mean, they've added teams, but Texas and Oklahoma kind of fit the regional footprint that the SEC is already in. Texas A&M's there, got LSU nearby. You get it, right? It's close. The Big Ten has sort of taken a different approach. They're still being selective, but they are trying to create a coast-to-coast conference, a coast-to-coast super conference that covers the entire nation, essentially. And so they've branched out in the West Coast, and they went and got Washington and Oregon and USC and UCLA. And now they're thinking about Florida, Texas, Mid-Atlantic region. So in order, Notre Dame's the big fish that really everybody wants. But Notre Dame is independent right now. They're doing fine financially. They, at the moment, still have access to the playoffs. I do wonder what their thought process is going to be and where things are going to fall with automatic qualifiers for conference champions and what that means for seeding for them if they're in that large team every year. But for the time being, Notre Dame's still in a great spot. They're target number 1. But after that, Florida State, which is openly in an unhappy marriage right now. Like, they're just publicly saying, we don't like the ACC. We want to leave. We're being left behind in college football. We don't want to be here. We think we deserve better. They've just been talking about that for the last year. They want to move on. So Florida State makes sense. Okay, you go get another blue blood program in the state of Florida. They want out. Perfect. But after that, they've got TCU there right behind Florida State. So Notre Dame, Florida State, TCU. And it says in parentheses that one reason that TCU is being considered is for the Dallas market, which is hilarious if you've been listening to the discourse over the past year from SMU fans that have told you very convincingly that SMU is the School of Dallas. Dallas is a pro sports town. And it's funny to me that the Big Ten are still thinking that way about TV markets when, yes, cable's still a thing, TV markets are still a thing. But as we continue to move more and more towards streaming, it's funny that they think like that. But I will say, one thing that made the Pac-12 crumble was the basically exclusive streaming TV deal that George Kliavkoff was pitching to their members. So even, as we sit here in 2024 and cord cutting's happening across the country, it still means something. But you get that Dallas market, you get the Fort Worth market, not only from TV perspective, but also recruiting. And I mean, the Blue Bloods in the Big Ten are already recruiting. Everybody in the country recruits to the DFW area. It's one of the tough things about, it's the blessing and the curse of where TCU is located. Yes, you have access to talent that a lot of people don't. You can drive, an hour east, an hour west, an hour south, and find great players. But you're also competing with every region in the country for those players, right? I mean, it's just Texas high school football is an institution. So they're targeting TCU. This came up a few years ago, and I remember doing a show about it. And the first thing that a few people very condescendingly said was, well, TCU doesn't have the academic credentials to get this done. Which, yes, Big Ten, I believe they're all AAU universities, R1 research universities. TCU doesn't have that certification at this time. So if that ends up being like a hard stop, well, okay. But we're talking about semi-pro football here. Like, it's bizarre to me that is still a consideration for the Big Ten. We're not all huddling up and sharing our research together. This is about money and about football. And that's it. Like, that's what we're talking about. And listen, I have a sports broadcasting degree. I finished with a 2.7. I just stumbled over my words when I tried to say condescending. Like, it tells you a little bit about my foray into academia. I'm not the smartest person in the world. There are a lot of really smart people that go to TCU, much smarter than me. I had honestly no business going to TCU. I had to go to a JUCO and hustle my GPA first. Point being, I'm not the person to talk to when it comes to these conversations. When I hear AAU, I think of basketball. That's where my brain goes. Anyway, I think we are moving further and further away from those things mattering because we're talking about schools paying athletes directly. We're talking about, TV contracts, semi-pro football, semi-pro basketball. And what I mean by that is we're moving away from the college sports model and the idea of student athletes. Like in this, I mean, we can grieve this. We can talk about how it stinks and how it's unfortunate that we're moving away from this. But the amount of time that these players and coaches are spending on these sports and the different limitations with what type of, academic career they can have because of all the demands they have with athletics makes the student athlete moniker kind of a sham. You can still be a student athlete. You can still push yourself as much as your sport will allow you to. But I think these academic credentials are going to matter less and less as the Big Ten continues to expand. But I could be wrong about that. If that ends up being a hard stop, then okay. But we're looking at a report here that says TCU could be in the mix. I think really this comes down to this. What do you, as a fan, what do you want TCU to be? Where do you want them to be in the college football landscape? If you were interested in them competing at the highest level and competing for national championships, at least having that opportunity to win a national championship year in, year out, then this is the best case scenario. If the Big Ten decides to expand and they invite TCU and you become part of that conference, and whether the Big Ten and the SEC decide eventually if they're going to break off or if they're just going to stay within the current parameters of the NCAA, this gives you an opportunity to have more resources. Now, TCU, I think this is a university that is committed to spending in athletics, to being the best. You better get on the phone and make sure your NIL is ready to rock. Because if you're going to be in the Big Ten and trying to compete for national titles, you can't be sitting in the 30s in high school recruiting every year. Like, you can't be ranked in the 30s and 40s in high school recruiting year in and year out. You're going to have to go start finding more money for players and going after, 4-star and 5-star players. In the Big 12, I think you can keep the strategy of being heavy in the portal, kind of fill out your depth with high school guys that are going to develop over time and compete for conference titles. Every few years, have a team that's hopefully talented enough and mature enough to compete for a national title, and that's the way forward. But if you're going to make this jump, and I think TCU is more than ready to do this because they've shown over the past 2 decades they can compete at the highest level. But you have to be more consistent, and you have to be willing to dedicate the type of time and resources it's going to take to compete at the highest level. So it just comes down to what do you want TCU to be? But the Big Ten is reportedly interested, according to James T. Yoder from Chat Sports. And maybe there's, maybe in this crazy world of realignment, there's still a way the Frogs are sitting right there with the 2 big dogs in a couple of years. When we come back, TCU baseball, another win last night. They're 9-0 now. So we'll talk about that next. It's Locked on Horned Frogs, your team, and we do it here every day. eBay Motors, I've told you about it before. Listen, I'm not ashamed to say it. I don't know a lot about cars. Car maintenance, I struggle with it sometimes. eBay Motors has been really clutch for me. Millions of parts for your ride or die. Listen, you have to keep your ride. You can't play around with it. You have to keep it running and smooth. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. Over 122 million parts. For your number one ride, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit program, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, that program is only available to U.S. customers. eBay Motors, find the right part for your vehicle at the right price today. I'm going to get to TCU baseball in a minute. I do want to give a shout out, though. TCU women's basketball, their best win of the year last night. They beat Texas Tech 73-52. 73-52. Huge win for the Frogs. Sedona Prince had 29 points and 11 rebounds. If you missed it, Sedona Prince, she's back. She's healthy. Madison Connor, she's back. She's healthy. Sydney Harris, came in after those 2 went out. She's playing well. This team looks good. The Big 12 tournament's going to be tough. They're 6-11 right now. They play West Virginia on the road to close the regular season. Chance to get to 20 wins on the season and 7 wins in the Big 12. I think the only path for them to make the NCAA tournament, well, I'm sure the only path for them to make the NCAA tournament is to win the Big 12 tournament. They got to go win the whole thing, win the title. That'll be tough. But this is a team you don't want to see, you do not want to see them in postseason play. I think they're playing their best ball. I think they're energized. Mark Campbell's done a good job. To go from teetering on, not being able to play because of forfeits and all the different injuries they had to where they're at now, I'm really encouraged by what Mark Campbell and his staff have done in year 1 there at TCU. Really impressive stuff. So hopefully they can keep it rolling. West Virginia and the Big 12 tournament, and maybe an NIT appearance. Maybe the NIT committee will see what they've done lately and what they've done when they're healthy. Because when they've been healthy, they've been really good. I mean, honestly, when they've been at full strength, their only loss this year was on the road to Baylor. And the losses started to pile up when they dealt with injuries. But a nice win for them at home on senior night, and really good job by Mark Campbell getting this season kind of turned around. They won 1 Big 12 game last year. They won 6 this year. A lot of those were against new members, but this was a win against Texas Tech against a legacy member and a team they got beat, that beat them earlier in the year in Lubbock. So nice win for the Lady Frogs over Texas Tech, and proud of what they've been able to do given all the challenging circumstances. TCU baseball is 9-0. They came up with a 6-1 win over Arizona last night. Braden Sloan was the story of the day. He just had a great night pitching. He came in first start of the season. Braden's been coming out of the bullpen, has done a nice job. Last year he was a Tuesday starter. He's done a really good job coming out of the pen so far this season. But last night got the start. He went 6 innings. He didn't give up any runs, only 3 hits, 13 strikeouts. He didn't walk anybody. He did hit 2 batters, 13 strikeouts. Like Dave Lund and Kirk Saarloos have done a great job over the offseason of working with him and getting him to a place where he's been super effective. So proud of Braden Sloan. He's been a good option for them out of the bullpen, was great as a starter. Andrew Mosiello came in after that, did an inning of scoreless work. Chase Hoover gave up 1 run and then gave way to Hunter Hodges, who closed it out. And then Ben Abelt looked a lot sharper last night after blowing that save on Tuesday. 1 inning, walked 1 guy, but didn't give up a hit. Struck out a couple and got out of there with a 6-1 victory. So 9-0 playing USC on Friday at Globe Life Field. Hit the ball well again, struggled in some situational hitting spots. Sam Myers had a big 2-run double to kind of break that game open and give them a 5-0 lead. Anthony Silva started scoring off with a double. Ryder Robinson had a good game at the plate. He lined out to center field and drove in a run. Curtis Byrne had an RBI. This team can rake, man. And Peyton Tolle was out again. And I think this is kind of odd. I mean, I know they're trying to help him figure out his timing and get him in the right space mentally. And he didn't look great on Tuesday. But it's weird to me how much he's been out of the lineup. I mean, is he healthy? Because this seems like 3 off days. And I know he's also pitching, and that probably has something to do with it. But 3 off days in the span of a week is kind of concerning to me. It just makes me wonder, do they have faith in him? Is he hurt? Like, what's going on? I get the occasional, hey, let's take a day off here, let you get your mind right. But this seems kind of excessive. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it's early in the season. They want to get him to a place where he's hitting. But even without him in the middle of the lineup, they've really raked all year long. And again, 6 runs. It was a little more difficult last night than it has been getting runs across the plate, but they were still able to scratch 6 runs across and won the ball game. Really business-like effort by the baseball team. So they play USC Friday, Arizona State Saturday, and then USC again on Sunday. And that's really it for the non-conference schedule. They'll play that series this weekend, or that kind of schedule of games this weekend. ACU, Abilene Christian on Tuesday, and then it's on the road to Lawrence, Kansas. So, I mean, you got to win 4 more, but they're looking at a chance to go 13-0 before conference play starts, which is pretty unheard of. So we'll see what they do this weekend. I mean, a loss is going to happen eventually, but it's really cool how they've been able to keep this winning streak going game after game so far this season. And, I mean, they look as advertised so far. The starting pitching hasn't gone really deep in games yet, aside from what Braden Sloan did last night, but I think that'll ramp up with time, and this team looks like the real deal. When we come back, some audience reaction will wrap things up. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. FanDuel, they've had this great deal going on. You need to take advantage of it while you can. New customers, $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right, one $5 bet you put down, you win that, you get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. You can bet on the NBA, quick bets, live sim game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA, an official partner of the Locked On Network. You can also download the FanDuel app. FanDuel, they make it easy for you to bet. FanDuel.com/lockedon. One $5 winning bet gets you $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel is where the game starts. Official betting partner of the NBA. On tomorrow's show, I'm going to have Jake Hatch from Locked On Cougars, the Locked On BYU affiliate, one of my favorite people in the Locked On Network to talk to. So excited to speak with him, and big game for the Frogs on Saturday night. BYU coming off a huge win over Kansas in Lawrence. So good stuff from them, and they've had a great season so far. Looking forward to what's going to happen there. A couple reactions from yesterday's show. Jacob Langford said baseball's off to a great start. Sloan was dealing Wednesday night, 13 Ks and 6 innings of shutout ball. Hope they stay hot. I hope they do too, man. I mean, I think they're playing as well as possible, and you're right, Braden Sloan was electric last night, to the point that I was like, man, could he be a weekend starter at some point? Because he was just getting it done and making things happen at a high level. And then Tanner McKinney said, I think for high school NIL, they should make them sign a contract. They have to be there for 2 years at least to get the money. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see that too. I think, there's a lot of legalese and labor laws involved in that I'm not sure would fly, but I totally get where you're coming from, Tanner. I mean, there's got to be some sort of restriction of movement here that makes sense for all parties. Yes, we want players to have freedom and autonomy, and we want them to benefit off their name, image, and likeness, but it's just crazy that everybody's a free agent every year, and you can basically kind of just leave and come and go as you want. We'll be back tomorrow, crossover edition of Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team, and we do it here every day.